Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics who write thought-provoking books. I'm Mark Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. And usually I am coming from Hanoi, Vietnam, because I'm a professor of entrepreneurship at Vin University. But today I'm visiting my daughters in Southern California. So I'm talking to you from Irvine, California. Today's guest is Jeffrey Beeson, author of the book Network Leadership: Promoting a Healthier World Through the Power of Networks. Jeffrey, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Mark.
It's a pleasure to have you. Jeffrey is talking to us from Germany. We've been very lucky to have guest authors from all over the world. So, Jeffrey, who has a strong connection to Philadelphia, why don't you tell us your professional background and how you got to where you're at right now?
Oh, I'd be happy to do so. Actually, I think I have a quite a unique blend of different experiences, and that is, I started out as a strategy consultant. I worked for Bain and Company and McKinsey for almost a decade. And then I had a sort of a career shift and dedicated myself, it's almost for the last 20 years, to the issue of leadership development, because I felt that leadership was where the real impact could be made. And I worked with the Center for Creative Leadership, as well as a company called Sendelany. And I was also part of the International Leadership Association. I was a board member. That's one of the largest it is the largest association dedicated to the practice and research of leadership. I was a board member for that organization for 8 years. And most recently, I've put all of that together and created my own company called Network Leadership, which is dedicated to helping companies become what I call a network organizations, to help them make that transition. So different intersections of different experiences have led to perhaps a unique perspective on organizations.
Well, we're glad you're also a graduate of Haverford and the Wharton School where you got your MBA. So let's jump right into your book. In part one, The Power of Networks, you describe leadership as an undergoing a paradigm shift. What specifically is broken the old leadership paradigm that networks help us finally understand?
Okay, well, that's a very good question, and I wouldn't necessarily say that the old leadership models are broken, but what is happening is that we're able to see leadership in a new light. And to just understand that just a little bit better, let me give you an example. I mean, until the microscope was created, biology was on a very different level, and as soon as a microscope was available, they could see things that they could never see before. And I think we're running into a similar situation today. We have what we call network analysis, and this is fairly new. It's a science that has been only officially acknowledged since 2005. But this science is changing everything. It's changing how we see things, and it's also allowing us to look into organizations in ways that we never used to be able to before. It's sort of, you can think of it as an X-ray into an organization and how work actually really gets done. And the insights of network science are leading us to understand that leadership does have to shift if we're going to be operating organizations that are at their most optimal. Because the organizations we have today, they've been very, very successful. But as we have seen with all the disruptions that are going on in the business world, they are not able to keep up with the constant change and the speed of change that we're witnessing today. So if they're going to do that, one of the fundamental things they have to look at is how their organizations are structured and how they lead those organizations.
Why do you believe traditional leadership theories have underplayed the role of relationships and connections compared to individual traits?
It's just easy. It's easier. It's easier to focus on the individual. and to look at what the individual is doing. And as I said before, we've not been able to really see some of the other things that we're looking at in terms of connections, and we can now really picture those. And so it's just not been something that's been relatively easy to do. And of course, I think just a human interest, to learn as much about ourselves as we can and to talk about ourselves. But leadership is not an individual sport; it's a team sport, and that's why looking at how people connect with each other is just as important, and maybe in some cases even more important than looking at the individuals themselves.
Important is that now, considering what's going on with the economics of the world, with tariffs and all the
Oof.
geopolitical changes that are going on?
Oh, that's a good question. Now you really hit a sweet spot. Well, in terms of tariffs, I've written actually a paper on tariffs, and I don't need to get into what tariffs are and all that sort of thing, but in a sense, what is really important is how countries are connected through trade, and the more interconnections there are, the network science is all about a science of connections and how systems are connected. And I should say one thing as well, which is really important here, is that network science has basically come to the conclusion that all complex systems, and this is really an important conclusion, all complex systems are based on the pattern, are structured around a pattern of networks. Uh, so that conclusion basically tells us that the better and the more robust the connections are, the stronger the system. So that's why I wanted to preface that with that piece from network science. The stronger the connections are, the better system. And what tariffs are doing is they're breaking up connections. I mean, they may be doing a lot of other things, and we don't need to get into that. But from a purely network perspective, breaking up connections and alliances and trade and disrupting it the way it has been going on is not, of course, healthy for the economy. And it's not healthy for the nations that are involved in that. And of course, I think we're seeing the economic consequences of that as a lot of companies are struggling to face and to deal with those issues.
The Wikipedia versus Encyclopedia Britannica story is powerful. What does it reveal about the authority, trust, and self-organization in the network age?
Well, that is an amazing story. That's an amazing story, which I think sort of highlights the age and how it's so different from what came before and why we need to do something differently. Because, you go back to before Wikipedia came on board, nobody thought that having a community edit articles and sort of like self-organize and self-police the articles was going to lead to anything that was of any kind of quality. And what the surprise has been is the depth and strength of collective and community intelligence that has emanated from just individuals basically looking at this and redacting their own articles and making sure that they are delivering the information that is wanted, and it's pretty reliable, and it has just overwhelmed any other source. The Wikipedia's got 100 times more website visitors than Encyclopedia Britannica has. And you have to realize Encyclopedia Britannica was the go-to place for almost 250 years. And it was eclipsed within a matter of about 5 years by what I would call community intelligence and networks working together, basically everyone independently, but coming together to work as a network. And so I think, truly uh, an incredible example of just how powerful networks are and why we need to get our heads around it. Because unless we do, we're going to continue to be disrupted, and we're going to continue to not understand how to deal with all of the constant change that is around us today, because it's not getting any slower. It's going to it's just accelerating.
You argue that life itself is organized as networks. How does the biological insight change how we should think about organizations?
As I said, all complex systems are networks. Are based on structures of network patterns, and that includes all of life, all of nature. And so therefore, you know, what it basically tells us is that organizations are part of nature, and that they follow the same rules and the same laws and same principles as nature does. And so basically what we're saying here is that organizations are going to be looking a lot more like natural processes. And the more that they go in that direction, the more successful they're going to be. And by the way, there are a lot of examples now that are starting to come to light which show that that's exactly the case. I'll give one example from a company in the United States, General Electric Appliances. I think it's a really important example because it's a fairly well-known company, and they went and shifted into what I call a network organization. Network organization being a bunch of small micro teams, not really hierarchical structures with no positions and titles, but everyone that's doing important work networked and being able to see what everybody else is doing. And as a result, they had double-digit growth rates for 6 years solid, moved from fifth position in the marketplace in the United States to first. And they had over 2,500 innovations within that period to completely outpace the market. This is what can happen. And just like the Wikipedia example, the power of unleashing this kind of force is tremendous. But unfortunately, we are very stuck in the kind of hierarchical organizations that we're used to because they've been so successful. But it's definitely leading towards changing how we understand organizations. And I would even say this change is inevitable. The only question is how fast.
Yeah, it's amazing. AI, of course, is now having the biggest impact. But what's your take on AI and networks?
Oh, well, how do we solve the issue of AI and then do that in a way that enhances human capabilities? That's, for me, the key question. And if we're going to answer that question, what we have to understand is how learning happens in human networks. And learning in human networks occurs in three different types of networks. The first kind of network for a learning network for humans is what I would call story telling networks. And that's, an old tradition that goes way back to the Stone Age campfires. We always gather around and share our experiences and tell our stories. And this is why stories are so powerful and why they are preferable to PowerPoint presentations, because that's the way we are wired to learn. And the better and stronger our networks are, excuse me, the better we learn. So that's one network. The second network is what I call inter-community networks. So you have a closed community that's learning together, but it really breaks things open when you talk to another community, when you engage into the world of another group that has a completely different experience. That's how best practices get exchanged. That's how knowledge really gets diffused. If you think of the scientific revolution, Newton came up with his principles, but he depended on what was happening in Italy and Galileo and what he had been doing. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gotten to where he gotten. And that sharing of knowledge in those networks is critical. And then third is what is called a consensus network, which is how large groups of people come to conclusions. So I can go a lot deeper into all these networks, but here's the point. The point is artificial intelligence needs to strengthen those networks, the human networks. And if we do that in a proper way, then it will enhance the capabilities of humans. If all we're doing is using AI to replace those networks and eliminate the storytelling networks, we're going to get into a lot of trouble. And I think that's looking at it from a network perspective is going to be key to making sure that it's integrated correctly into society. And if we're just looking at it as intelligence replacement, we're going to be potentially losing a lot of our own human capabilities to machines.
What does it really mean for leaders to move from controlling people to working with complex systems?
Okay. From well, I mean, I think if you look at hierarchies, what you basically, I'm not, we can call it control, but I think what you really typically want is compliance and efficiency, and you want everything to go out the door at the right time. And, to a certain extent, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think, the world's too fluid. It's too dynamic. And, it's the result of the digital revolution. What has happened? We've got not only the flow of information is, gone exponentially higher, but also the speed at which it travels. And so we have a dynamics now in the networks, because networks are about how people are connected and what information is flowing between them, that have just exploded. And as a result of that, you can't look at efficiency and control and expect that will work. That only works in a stable environment. And so a complex environment which has feedback loops and has each of the various nodes inside a network interacting with each other, creating an impact on how that network actually functions, has to run in a different way. And it has to have the dynamics of quickened decisions. There's a wonderful example from the U.S. Army. In order to fight terrorists, they had to not be commanded from above, but they had to allow the people on the ground to make decisions on the in the moment. And only then could they really fight the terrorists in an appropriate way. And we're talking about the same thing here, in the sense that those groups and entities that are closest to the customer need to be able to take the wisdom that they're getting and immediately be able to convert it, and not wait until it travels up and down the hierarchy, because by then it's either too late or the information gets somehow misinterpreted. And so it requires a lot more confidence in people making decisions where they need to be made. And that's a very different leadership paradigm.
Yeah, that's how Israeli military is structured, is to make all the decisions at the tip of the spear, and the general's job is to support and give them the materials they need to succeed, but all the decisions are made at the front end.
Right.
In part two, connection and contagion, the idea of 6 degrees of separation is famous. Of course, we all hear Kevin Bacon, 6 degrees of separation. But
Yeah.
how should leaders practically use weak ties rather than just admire the concept?
Yeah. Oh, by the way, in my book, I have a link to the original video where that Kevin Bacon thing started. It's pretty amusing. Um, so here's the point. The point is that you can actually get, let's say, a letter to anyone else in the world, and it only has to go through six hands. That's the 6 degrees of separation. Now, most organizations today, hierarchical organizations today, they have what we can call in network science the path length. What is the longest path? How many connections do you have to go through to get from one person to another? And it's all within one company. And in most hierarchical organizations today, that number is larger than six. What does that tell you? I mean, just let that sit. If you can connect with anyone in the world through six connections, but inside of companies right now, you have the longest path, the most distant people from one another are more than six. That tells you that you don't have optimal connections inside your organization. And that's the case for most hierarchical organizations. And I'll give you another example. I mean, Bayer is doing one of the biggest transformations of an organization that we've ever probably seen. And they've gone from 12 hierarchical levels to five. And they've cut their path by, I think it's something like close to 13, 14, and it's below five now. And they're starting to show the improved performance as a result of that. So the six connections can tell you a lot about how decisions get made and how dynamic and adaptable your organization is.
You show how emotions, beliefs, and energy spread through networks. How conscious are most leaders of emotional contagion they create?
Well, I wish there were, of course, there are leaders who are very aware of that, so we can't really generalize. But I would wish that more people would be a little bit more aware. And I mean, this is old leadership theory. I mean, that what you do counts more than what you say. So I'm not, in that sense, breaking any new ground here. But what we can say is exactly how far that influence travels and how it travels. And that's what network science allows us to do. And so, yeah, leaders should be very well aware of this because, particularly emotions, information is one thing, and that's important too, of course. But emotions color our decisions, our moods, our ability to collaborate. I think everyone has a story of someone who's a real, what I would call a de-energizer, is in a bad mood. It affects the team. And the opposite is true too. Someone who is super enthusiastic and really believes in what the team is doing can have tremendous impact on the spirit of that team. And so I think all of us have experienced that to a certain degree. The interesting thing is, it will not only affect your team, it'll affect the people that your team is in contact with. And that's interesting. So another interesting sort of little anecdote, those people who want to successfully go on diets, it helps when the people around you are also going on a diet because that affects your emotional state. If you're the only one doing it alone, it's a lot tougher. So that's the correlation there as well.
Well, and that's why people join Weight Watchers, or I guess Weight Watchers going out of business in the US, but join those kinds of groups,
Yeah,
just like
sure. So that you
Alcoholics
have
Anonymous, because
the
it's the only
the
way that you can make that happen.
right, exactly.
Um, the, th the 3 degrees of influence rule suggests leaders affect people they've never meet. How should this change leadership responsibility and ethics?
Well, I think that's always been an issue I mean, those people who have written about ethics, this is nothing new. You have responsibility to hold up ethical behavior because it's not only just the immediate people who are affected, but you're also showing an example to other people who will be impressed by what you're doing. So I don't think that this changes anything from traditional leadership theory. Again, we just know how that influence travels now much better than we used to. But ethical considerations are critical because if you break those norms, it will have impact on people that you never necessarily talk to.
You explain why the rich get richer in networks. How can leaders prevent unhealthy power concentration while still benefiting from hubs? And I think we're seeing this now on global wealth control.
Yeah, yeah. Well, with the whole idea of rich get richer, you know, the belief was is that the internet age would bring in a little bit more equality, and of course, it's the opposite. That has happened. Um, and there is a phenomenon in networks that those people gravitate to those people who have the better connections, and and so that's where you see the rich getting richer, because once you've made those first $1 million, then it's easier to make the next million, and because you have the connections to help you do that and to leverage it. And it is unfortunately the way networks do work, and we need to be conscious of that because we can see it in our economies that there's been an explosion of billionaires and that is a result of networks as well. What you need to do is be aware of it in an organization because certain hubs, and I'll call some of these really highly connected individuals or highly connected departments, even. I mean, and we don't have to do it at the level of individual, are what I call hubs. And hubs do play a very important role because they shorten the pathways. We just talked about the 6 degrees of separation. They help to shorten the pathways so that people can get to the people they need to get to through those hubs because they're wealthy in connections. And so they play a really important role in networks. And actually, without hubs, you wouldn't be able to have the concept of self-organization, which I guess we're going to talk about a little bit later. So they're critical to a network. However, having said that, if there are too few hubs, uh, that's dangerous because then the system is not resilient. It's actually fragile because any of those hubs go out, the whole system could go down. Or very, very powerful hubs, same situation. So what you want to do is have a proliferation of hubs. And so as a leader, you want to be watching that and you want to create connections where it's needed and to create hubs where that's needed. That's part of your leadership role. And I'm sure, most leaders don't even think that way at the moment, but that's going to make the system healthier. And that's an important role of a leader is to make sure the system is working at its optimal capacities. And the tendency of the rich getting richer can, if it's not monitored, lead to a lack of resilience in the organization.
In part three, Gardner, you introduced the metaphors of leaders as acupuncturists and gardeners. How do
Yeah.
you differ from the classic hero leader model?
Yeah, so I try to paint a picture of what this new kind of leadership is like. What are we talking about? And in a way that, human stories and the way that humans can understand it. And, the typical story that has been told is that the big leader, the great leader, is the captain of a ship. That's a very normal, typical metaphor that's been used. And the captain is in control of his ship. He sets the destination and the course. He makes all the decisions. And he's very clear on his communication, telling people exactly what to do. That's a typical type of metaphor that would be used for leadership in the past. And I said, this metaphor is not appropriate for someone who's leading networks. This is not the way that networks function, and it is not something that accrues to the dynamics of networks. And so I struggled a little bit to come up with a counter metaphor because what we're doing here with this whole idea of network science is we are creating a new vocabulary. We're creating a new storyline of what leadership of the future looks like. And so I couldn't actually narrow it down to just one metaphor. And I came up with two because there are different aspects of networks that are addressed by both. And the first one is a leader as acupuncturist. Because if you know an acupuncturist, what they do is they uh, are always paying attention to the energy in the body and how it flows through the body, what they call chi. And their role is to use needles and different meridians and pinpoints in the body to release blockades so the energy flows better throughout the body and then allow the body to heal itself. That's the idea behind acupuncture. And I think that's exactly the idea behind network leadership. You want the organization to heal itself, and all the forces of a living organization will do that if allowed to. You just need to make sure that the energy blockages are taken out and that you do that in a precise way. So that's the acupuncturist metaphor. But it didn't really give me the growth part of the aspect of networks. And so as I was looking at growth, I said, no, we need to have an organic metaphor as well. And I chose leader as a gardener. And a gardener is someone who, prepares the soil, gets it ready so that they can put the seeds in, and then really takes care of that garden, watering it, giving it fertilizer, making sure that, plants are moved if something's not right, not getting enough sun, too much say shade, and constantly watching to see what's happening with the health of that garden. And the gardener doesn't know exactly what plants are going to bloom in any given year. But what they do know is that if they take care of it in a certain way, they will have a beautiful garden. And they do that continuously year after year, producing a wonderful garden on a regular basis. And so that was my second metaphor, leader as a gardener. As a matter of fact, I've written a little booklet on leader as a gardener uh, about exactly those things that network leaders need to do.
Why is strengthening flows often more powerful than recognizing boxes on an organizational chart?
Well, that's simple. That's because flows are how the work really gets done. If you have to do a project, you need to impart information and give it to someone else. That information has to arrive, and in order for it to be actionable, paying attention to flows is how the work gets done. Boxes are trying to change that. They're trying to, in a sense, by changing boxes, they're trying to do that. But it's sort of like the blind man. If you change, a little structure here and a little there, you're going to change the way people connect with each other, no doubt about it. But you're driving a little blind because what is it what are the actual flows that you're trying to improve? And that I think that people that do normal organizational change, they're just clueless about it in the sense of how the work really gets done. But if you have an organizational diagram, which nowadays we can put together, uh, you know how information is flowing or not flowing, and what you really want it to do is flow. And if it's not flowing, then change that. You don't have to necessarily change the boxes. What you need to do is change the collaboration and the way the collaboration is happening. And so we now have the tools to do that, and it's a lot more effective. And it can be a lot less intrusive too, because when you change the boxes, you can completely shift the system and mess it up. Whereas if you just, it's like the acupuncturist, if you just pinpoint the one place where the energy is being blocked, you can solve miracles with almost next to no effort. And so from that point of view, less investment, higher impact. I think reorganization in that sense is a thing of the past.
You emphasize psychological safety, awe, and curiosity. How do these emotional states actually improve network performance?
Um, Here I have to talk about the concept of push versus pull and the whole idea of change. We've been living with the whole paradigm of change management that you create a vision, you create a plan, you try to convince people, and then you push it through the organization. And there's a whole 8 steps, famous 8 steps of how to do this that people have been following for decades. And that's not how living systems work. And now, so, they're surprised when they get resistance. They just, they shouldn't be. Because, I mean, how often have you been successful in changing your partner, and having them do things that you want them to do? I mean, we all know that and have life experiences that living human beings and living systems, you just don't change by command, and it doesn't work that way. How does it work? How does it really work? The way it really works is people want to change. And if you do that, then that makes all the difference because all of a sudden there's energy flowing in the direction of the change that is desired. And how do you awaken that desire to want to do that? The key is curiosity. Curiosity. And so a leader, and a major part of a leader's job in a network, is to awaken curiosity because that creates pull. That's what I call pull. You get people to be curious about the future, about what's possible, about a technology or a product or a service, and how maybe it can even be better. And if you can do that, then you've got one of the best levers that you possibly have to get the organization to shift and change. It's the same, when you try to change a person, only when they internally want to change does it actually occur. And so that's the trick of networks and why networks require curiosity. So I would say it's one of the most important facets of leading the networks.
What's one small intervention a leader can make that can disproportionately improve the health of their network?
Okay. Well, I sort of alluded to that in the whole metaphor of the acupuncturist, but let me introduce the idea of gatekeepers. We've all known gatekeepers in organizations. Those are the ones who block information, who don't let it get through, right? And make sure that they maintain their own power because they're the ones that are distributing the information. Um, we've all seen people like this, right? And they can have a very deleterious effect on how work gets done, in morale and motivation, and also in just decision making because the right information is not getting to the right people at the right time. Best way to deal with this from a network perspective is to create transparency, to see exactly what people are doing. And actually, there's now technology that allows you to do that. There's blockchain technology, which makes documents unassailable, and also there's all sorts of internet and so forth that you can make things transparent with business decisions transparent. Private things, obviously, we need to be very careful about because that's a different realm altogether. But business processes and transactions and decisions, the more transparent that you can make them, the better the energy and the information is going to flow inside a network. And so just by creating an environment of transparency will have a major impact on how well your network functions.
In part four, ecosystem evolution, you've traced the shift from hierarchy to platforms and ecosystems. What forces are making this transition inevitable?
Well, I think this is the really core of the idea here, and what I'm most excited about, particularly with the examples that are coming down the pike right now. As I argue in my book, there's been a movement ever since 2001. 2001 was the beginning, was the signing of the Agile Manifesto, and where all the agile processes were introduced, and Scrum, and there's a dozen of other names for these ways of doing it. Initially, there were ways of doing software development, but now they're used for project management. Even marketing departments have done it. I think I cite an example of Coca-Cola using it for their marketing ads department. So these things are beginning to be fairly commonplace. But what has been happening is we've been progressively moving to what some people call an agile organization. I personally call it a networked organization because it's using many of the same principles that began with the Agile Manifesto. And things like self-organization, autonomy, small teams, iterations, experimentation, all of these things are part of that movement. But the big question has been, can you scale this to include an entire large organization? And until recently, we probably would have said, we're not really sure. But I think probably one of the biggest business stories in 2026. It's a little bit under the radar right now, and I don't think that too many people are talking about it with so much other stuff going on. But probably the biggest business story of 2026 is the transformation at Bayer, the aspirin makers. And the Harvard Business Manager just had an article in December saying the boldest management experiment of all times. That was the title of the article. And, for me, I basically was predicting this back when I wrote my book in 2023, that network science is pointing the way towards this kind of organization, which what Bayer is doing is creating a networked organization. They've gone from 12 hierarchy levels to five. They've created small teams to deal with everything. They've gotten rid of titles and positions. They've created distributed leadership, all of the things that I've discussed in my book. Um, but the reason this is so big is that this is a huge organization, 100,000 people, and and uh, uh, and it looks like the first the stories are starting to come out because they're being successful. So just in the last 2 months, the stock price tripled of Bayer. And anyone who knows the history of Bayer, they've been down in the doldrums for years now. Ever since they bought Monsanto in 2018, they've been on the verge of bankruptcy. And they've turned it around. They've turned it around by reorganizing themselves as a network as opposed to a hierarchy. And I think once this starts to get out, it's going to invite a lot of other organizations to join. And my prediction, as I say in my book, is that this is the way organizations have to go. I'm not, I'm not mincing words here. Uh, if they're going to deal with the speed of change that we're dealing with, this is the only solution. And those companies that have made that change, there's still only a handful, are showing extraordinary results. And Bayer apparently is beginning to do so as well. And so I think that a lot of boardrooms are going to be discussing this during the course of this year.
Do agile teams, DAOs, and hires, I'm not going to pronounce this name right, Rendi High?
Renden Hai, it's a Renden Hey.
Rendon Hay,
Hey,
model, embody, network logic differently. You need to explain that.
sure, no problem. So I talked about the progression. You had agile methods that were mostly for software development at the beginning. And we've been moving towards a more network type of organization ever since. One of the big things that occurred already in the early part of this century were platforms and things like Airbnb or Uber, uh, which have also created networks and connections with people outside the organization. And then we moved into business ecosystems where people are partnering with groups. Particularly, I look at that in the pharmaceutical industry, but also an example of NASA, which collaborates with hundreds of organizations to make sure that they can get their rockets off, so that organizations are no longer just monoliths. And then it goes into the whole idea of breaking up the company into networks. And Hire is a Chinese company that was probably a pioneer in this area. And they called their system, it's Chinese, they call it Ren Den Hei. And it's due to a very unique individual who had a mantra. Basically, he said zero distance to the customer. And that led him wanting to be as close as he could to the customer, led him to move towards a networked organization, which is, by the way, one of the great advantages of a networked organization. And then we have even the cyberspace coming in, which is the DAOs, which are beginning to create working spaces that you can join in Web 3.0. And so that's the progression. Bayer would be in the same field as Rendenai and Hire. And there are several examples in that space. The DAO one is still a little bit more future oriented, but it basically is showing how boundaries are going to start collapsing. There's nothing stopping a company from all of a sudden connecting with someone outside the company, and particularly in the cyber area, that's very easy to do. And so what we're seeing is the network logic. Now, each of those are following the same network logic. They're no different from each other. They're different dimensions. The Rent and Highs of this world are showing that it can be done in large organizations. whereas the DAO space is just adding the blockchain and technology, where I mean, there's a lot of potential features that could be very interesting, but that's still uh, still a ways off. But I think this is where the world is going, and I think we're going to see some radical transformations in business in the next 10 years. Definitely, it's gonna accelerate. So I'm
Um,
pretty excited about that.
ecosystem leadership. In ecosystem leadership, where does authority come from if not the position? Because you talked about Bear, how they basically stripped out titles and everything. How is that going to work?
Well, there are. I mean, the network system is not completely hierarchy-less. As I said, Bayer still has five hierarchies. Higher, the Rent and High company still has three hierarchies, but that's pretty lean for a company that's about 75,000 employees. Um, so there's still some hierarchies, and they haven't gone completely. And I think to some degree, networks require hierarchies, as we saw with the idea of hubs. So that they're not going to disappear completely, but we are reducing the degree of separation that's occurring inside. Uh, what happens is that the people who are leading the organization, really the entire organization, the gardeners, if you will, or the gardeners in chief. Um, we don't really have titles for these people, but it's interesting that Hire, the CEO who's run Hire, he doesn't call himself CEO. He calls himself an architect, a systems architect. And you can see that, we're struggling with the nomenclature, but we could call him the head gardener. There are some people who are really paying attention to the health of the network, and that would be the highest hierarchy level at the top, looking at that how the network is really functioning and holding together and making the appropriate adjustments as needed. So there is some of that, but they're just not the kind of names that we've been giving people in the past before.
Questions from the audience. What do you think of holacracy and sociocracy? I hope I pronounced that correct.
Very
And
good
also the
question.
partnership model, like a consulting or audit firm.
No, and the holacracy and sociocracy question is something that I've dealt with and really looked into, and I'm even a certified holacracy practitioner, by the way. But I've come to the conclusion that holacracy has not succeeded, and so sociocracy the same, which I know a little bit less about, but it's on a similar pattern, I think, than the same reason. It's not succeeded as much as uh, the network organizations I'm talking about, because they're not looking at it from a network perspective. They're looking at it from a self-organization perspective. And I think that's the wrong perspective. Everybody wants self-organization, and a lot of people really see that as the ultimate goal of an organization, is to give people a lot more autonomy. But that's actually the wrong emphasis. The reason that a buyer or a hire can do what they're doing in terms of self organizing teams is because they also follow a principle which is critical for the success of a network, which is intentional interdependency. And that's a term, and that needs to really be emphasized here, because it's about how connections across teams, across self-managing teams are created. And that's the secret of success to a network organization. And I'm afraid that holacracy is focused way too much on self-organization and not enough on connection. And as a result of that, it's not had the kind of success that we're seeing here with networked organizations. Okay, was there a second question there?
You've in part five, homeostasis, regeneration, and symbiosis. You frame leadership as serving balance, renewal, and mutual thriving. How does this redefine the purpose of leadership itself?
Uh, well, I think then that's an age-old question. It's an age-old question about what is leadership for. And, most of the answers about that have gone around, getting things done or achieving certain outcomes or, inspiring people to move into a new space. Those have been the traditional ways of explaining what leadership is for. None of those are wrong by any means, but it's interesting if we put it into a network perspective, what all of a sudden shifts and what changes when we look at leadership from that perspective. And one of the primary issues that comes out for me anyway is that the key issue about networks, and as again, we understand that all living systems are networks, right? So, our brain is billions of neurons interconnected with each other that creates what our ability to have consciousness and cognitive functioning. That's a network. Organizations are networks. And what it is that you're trying to do, just like with a human being, is you have to focus on health, the health of the system. That's the purpose of leadership. Leadership is there to try to make sure that the system is healthy. And the healthier the system is, the better it will function. And so that's a different twist. It's it's not about achieving certain objectives. That's for the people inside the organization. They can do that. What the leader of the organization needs to be focusing on is that the organization itself is functioning as optimally as it can. And if that happens, it will itself create unbelievable outcomes, just like the Wikipedia example.
Um, how does symbiosis differ from traditional stakeholder management?
Well, it's quite different. I mean, traditional stakeholder management is about asking everybody who has a stake about what their opinion is. So that's an important piece of governance. But symbiosis is not about governance. It's about collaboration. It's about evolution. The word comes itself from the language of evolution. So how is it that organisms evolve? How do they become new species, if you will, from a purely biological point of view? And what we found is that the most powerful force for new species, new evolution, is symbiosis, which means two different organisms or more collaborating together to create a whole new life form. That's what symbiosis is. And so what we're saying is in business, symbiosis is going to be one of the most powerful things in terms of business development. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. There's a Swedish company called Assa Abloy. Assa Abloy used to be a locksmith. They made locks for doors, keys, locks, really basic mechanical stuff, right? And then came the digital revolution, and slowly but surely they moved to intelligent cards. And everyone who's been in a hotel has gotten that card key to open up their hotel room. That's Assa Abloy. They're the market leader in that field. So they went from mechanical keys to card keys. But it didn't stop there. Then all of a sudden they realized they had information on that card key that they could use. And they started to work with building system integrators. And all of a sudden they were into security protocols and all of a sudden they realized what we do is not keys, what we do is access, and shifted their entire working with all of these system buildings system um, providers changed their whole understanding of what kind of a company they were. Now they're into identity. And so they help governments across the world to check your identity. And I'm sure many of you have experienced going on to the internet and trying to identify yourself. Well, Assa Abloy technology is behind that. So they've gone from locksmith through collaboration with other businesses to become now the world's leading so-called access provider. And Forbes, by the way, lists them as one of the most innovative companies in the world. So that's what we mean by symbiosis. That's not quite the same thing as stakeholder management.
So, what does homeostasis look like in a human organization under constant disruption?
That's a really, really good question. And sometimes you think, oh my God, is there such, can there be such a thing? Homeostasis is uh, is the state in which a body, an organism, is functioning well, and it maintains a certain operating performance level. So, for instance, human beings have a temperature of 98.6, and there are all sorts of processes that are happening. Even though we're very dynamic, there are certain things that stay fairly constant, and our body temperature is one of them, or our sugar levels in our body uh, will stay fairly level. I mean, if they don't, then the organism starts to actually be unhealthy and sick. And so it's really important to try to maintain those levels. And so I brought in this concept of homeostasis, is that's what organizations are doing as well. They're, in a sense, they're also biological systems. They're trying to maintain a certain amount of equilibrium, a certain amount of profits, a certain amount of flow of talent inside the organization. There are lots of things that are flowing through an organization that you need to maintain, and it renews itself. But it looks stable even if the people who are in the company, they change over time. Some people leave, some people come. Things are shifting. Um, but in total, with all the disruptions that's occurring, you sometimes wonder, is it possible to maintain that? Well, to a certain degree, yes. A lot of the disruption is just making some adjustments. So if you didn't have an e-commerce platform before, maybe now you do. It certainly changes the way you're doing work, but it's not a real major shift. It's just a new channel. It's not like the symbiosis example I just gave before. So that's what it looks like. That stability, and that's a good functioning network where we'll move towards stability that maintains the system's integrity. But it's increasingly challenging in today's environment, I must admit.
Last question. Looking ahead, what kind of leader will the world most urgently need if we're to take the network perspective seriously?
Well, um, this is, I think, what it requires is humility. I think that is the one characteristic that is probably the most important for a leader of tomorrow, because it requires someone who doesn't know all the answers. That tended to be the paradigm of the past. That somehow the further up you got, you were supposed to know all the answers or have all the answers. The world is way too dynamic. There's way too much information. There's way too much shift out there. Um, you have to be humble, and you have to really be able to sense what is happening, because what's happening at a network level is not necessarily visible. It's not necessarily visible. We can create maps to make it a little bit more tangible, but you got to get a sense as to whether that network is in equilibrium or not, and when to do something about it. And that's it's more of a hands-off kind of leader who nevertheless is constantly observing, constantly watching. I think it does really challenge our models of leadership in a fundamental way.
Jeffrey, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Really enjoyed it. I think, as one of the people wrote, it's very interesting and substantive session. I really enjoyed the book. And I hope you'll write another book and we'll have you back again.
Well, actually, I am writing another book. I've tried to dilute it's called the Seven Practices of Highly Effective Network Leaders, because I'm trying to dilute into what it really means to lead in this environment.
Well, again, I thank you so much, and we look forward to when that book comes out as well. Everyone, have a great, wonderful weekend. Stay dry for those of you who are from the Philadelphia area, as another storm may be approaching. And I hope to get myself to Philadelphia on Monday, so I can visit my family as well. Bye, everyone. Take care. Have a great weekend.